This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others. Jamie, welcome back.
It's nice to be back.
Did you have a nice break?
Yeah, it has been nice.
It's been nice to take the time and dedicate time that we normally would spend to writing and recording to the kiddos.
Absolutely.
And enjoying the holidays, especially after the craziness of 2020.
Oh.
But welcome to 2021. Are you ready to start over?
That'd be nice.
Can we try this again?
Right.
Okay, vaccines and all. I mean, should we
let's not talk about that.
Do we need to recap 2020? I mean, good grief. I mean, we had to decide whether you liked your black friends or your police officer friends, or we had to choose like which creepy white guy was, the least creepy.
Okay, Brent.
Oh, I can go on.
But 2020 was good for us. It was good for us.
It had some positive for sure, right? So do you have a resolution for this year?
This year, actually, I do, but I'm a resolution person. I know that you are not a resolution person, but you kind of broke your habit last year, and you did make a resolution of sorts.
Almost before the start of 2020 last year. It's been a little over a year now that I had set out and said, okay, I'm going to do the podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because our first episode of the year, I think, was important and ties a little bit to folks that are kicking off resolutions. And really, when you think about getting ideas off the ground, when you think about instituting change or doing something in your life that's different, or maybe you're in a spot where I want to go grow. 2020 was awful because of these things. I'm going to do this different in 21. When you think about that kind of stuff, a lot of folks will struggle to get things off of the ground, and they have a hard time getting things started.
Right.
And, I think we'll talk a little bit about how we did that with the podcast, and then in general, some pointers and thoughts on how to do that.
So what are we talking about this week?
Incubation, getting your ideas off the ground. Incubation, what does that mean? You're probably the expert at incubation in my mind.
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I have incubated a few chickens in my life.
How many chickens have you mothered?
Well, if you do 12 at a time, I've done 72.
72 chickens. Folks, that's a lot of birds. Yeah, and some of them have been eaten.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
they're good eating.
They are good. They make a good tortilla soup, right? So tell me about the incubation process. What is that?
Well, you have to have the egg that has already been fertilized because you can't do that part.
What's fertilized? What does that mean?
That means a rooster has been
involved
in the process.
It's a violent. Go Google it. You can watch a video. I'm not going to describe.
Don't go Google it.
It's reasonably violent on our property.
Well, and then we have an incubator that we put the eggs in, but you can't just leave them there. You have to check the humidity, and the temperature has to be just right, and you have to flip them 3 times a day, between 3 and 5 times a day. You can candle them, which means that you can actually look inside that egg, and you can see which ones are viable and which ones aren't. And then on day 21, if everything is perfect, then you have
21
babies.
days of perfectly rotating eggs and going through this process. It's elaborate, which is where we get this idea of incubating ideas or incubating something. It's not a trivial thing. You don't just go, hey, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go sell this, and it's immediately just going to take off, and I'm going to be rich and famous.
Right.
This is not how things work. So, have you ever caught yourself making any of these statements? If you're a listener and you're working at maybe a mid-size or a larger company, you ever caught yourself saying, this company is making a huge mistake by not doing blank? Or have you ever caught yourself saying or asking yourself, if we would only see the value in Y, and I don't mean W-H-Y, I mean let them just in blank, then we could really have some success, but management will just shoot that down. You ever caught yourself asking, saying that or thinking that to yourself? That's a little bit about what we're going to talk about this week. Or if you're a small business owner, I know we have lots of friends and listeners that run their own businesses. This applies to you too. If you've ever had this thought where you go, you know what, if I just had enough time, I could branch out over into this space and really start to make some money. Or have you ever caught yourself thinking, if I just had expertise in blank in this area?
Right. And it reminds me of, we had Sean Small come on and talk about storytelling. And his board had told him, if you had $1 million, and he just thought, that he had a huge donor, and then he started dreaming, right?
Right.
So that's a roadblock for a lot of people. If
Money.
I had money,
I only need $100,000. If I
right.
had that, then I could get this off the ground.
Right.
Okay, that's what we're talking about. These are these roadblocks that mentally we put on ourselves that make it that just stall ideas that are really good. So we want to talk a little bit about how to get the good ideas that you have off the ground so that you can control your own destiny here and not wait for some savior, not wait for this windfall of cash, not wait for the magic amount of time. I was just on a conference call today and I was giving people a kind of a virtual tour of my shop, and I was talking about we have a 65-inch flat screen TV that's been sitting in my shop since day one.
Right.
And it's a TV that I'm guessing one of the kids broke or something's wrong with it. And I know I can repair it. It's a time thing.
Right.
And I was saying, well, one day I'm going to do that. And I was telling them, I think we could probably declare the rule of 2020. If you didn't get it done with the time you had in 2020, because we have had a lot of extra time, a lot of us,
right,
then it ain't getting done. And if it didn't get done by end of 2020, you should kick it to the curb and move on about your day.
And I respect these questions and I get these questions, but I think that there are also just like some fear that's not necessarily associated with if only this,
right,
but just fear of failure.
For sure.
And I think a lot of people don't go for what they want out of fear.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that we can talk about to help get over that, right?
Yeah.
So I think, let me talk a little bit about the way I think about this and how I'm breaking this down. And it really gets down into 3 steps. And the 3 steps I would say are think, know, and show.
You are a 3-bucket guy, aren't you?
I like 3 buckets. It just happens that this one fell into those kinds of buckets. I know that's not true. There were really 2 buckets, and I added a 3rd one.
Yeah.
But the 3rd one does make sense, and it's the first one that I want to talk about. And the more I thought about this, I'm like, a lot of you are like, well, I already have an idea that I'm thinking about. Okay, but let's talk about it. Will also be people saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't get thoughts like this. Okay, something's wrong. I think so let's talk a little bit about where the good ideas come from and how you can continue to create those, right? How can you put yourself in position to create those ideas, right? And so the first thing I would want to talk about is everybody's a little bit different here. You have to figure out where are those times when you are thinking in this way.
Right.
Like, and I'm talking about in what way? I'm talking about the things that you're dealing with on a daily basis. Like whether you're corporate or small business, these things that you're dealing with, you're like, man, this is a problem. Somebody should solve this. Every time you're thinking about that stuff, you should make note of it. Write that down. You should capture it in some way. One of the things I did for years was I stole this from Peter King, who writes Monday Morning Quarterback. It used to be for CNN SI. I don't know where he writes for now. And he had this list on his blog of things I think.
Yeah.
Right. And these are things that are subject to be wrong, but it's almost like his own stream of consciousness journal idea type of thing. I think it's valuable to do that. I was doing that for a while, and I still do it on occasion. I do it digitally in OneNote, and I'll just have some things that come across my mind. It'd be crazy if we could do this. It'd be great, and I capture them at the time when I see the problem. When I see something, go, oh, this is outrageously inefficient. There's got to be a better way to do this. Now, I'm an engineer. My job is to make everything hyper efficient. So I'm seeing these all the time. But whatever it is you do where you're seeing this, this should be better. Write those things down. Why write them down? Because you're not going to tackle all of them. You're going to need to tackle the ones that make sense. Now, you also need to think about when are the times you think you capture these good ideas. Some people get them in the shower. Right. Some people, I was listening to somebody on YouTube today talking about the way that they capture these really good ideas is when they're trying to deal with a problem, they're trying to come up with a creative solution, they'll go back to their email and do that for a while just to break the monotony of, well, that's the worst possible thing for me, but that works for him.
Right.
Everybody's going to be a little bit different here. You have your own kind of creative zone that you're going to need to come back and try to solve those problems. But you whether it's in the middle of the night or when you see the problem head on that you're dealing with, write it down. Start capturing these areas of this is a problem, this is a problem. Start capturing some of these problems and then find those creative times where you're coming up with solutions.
It's about making space, right? You have to find the time. You have to make the time if you actually want to make an impact.
Yes.
Because we can get so bogged down in the minutia of life and minutia of work, and just our schedule gets overpowered. But what if you just blocked off 15 minutes? That is just you brainstorming and fixing some of the other stuff that's driving you crazy.
Yeah, and that's why I think there's value to making that list and then looking. And the other thing about making the list is I'll make a list of these things, and a lot of them are junk. I mean, maybe 10% fall through to problems that I actually want to go give some thought towards solving, or maybe I have a really good idea, I think, and then I go back, no, that's an awful idea,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's good to have a whole list of them, and then you can look through and say, which ones are going to have the biggest impact? Biggest impact on your company, biggest impact on your career, all of those types
ROI.
of things. What is where if you could solve that problem, where are you going to get the best bang for your buck? What you don't want to go do is spend a bunch of time and mental cycles trying to solve a problem that nobody cares about, right? So we'll talk about how you can determine that a little bit separately, but that would be the first thing. And then here are some thoughts to help you come up with innovative solutions, okay? Just some things to think about. The first thing I would say is and I've said this before on the podcast, if you don't understand how something works, you have no chance to innovate it. So you need to get into the details where you understand what's going on. And another way you can think about this is you can't separate strategy from execution. You have to have these close together, meaning if you're trying to come up with a strategic, innovative idea and you don't see the details of how it's working and how it's executed, you're not going to succeed. You need to be close enough to understand exactly how something is working.
Right. And sometimes you need to understand it more from just your perspective.
Yes.
Because there may be very different perspectives that are looking at the same problem.
That's right. And so for me, if I see something go, this is broke, one of the steps I might take is I want to go talk to these people and understand why it's that way. What I'm not going to do is come in there, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but what I'm not going to do is come in there and go, hey, I'm looking to innovate and take over this space.
Right.
Whoa,
I want to fix your stuff.
Whoa, you're gonna get met with some defensiveness right away.
Yeah.
I'm not going to come in like that. I'm just trying to learn how this works. And, I'm just trying to understand why this exists the way it does. And so you need to understand how something works. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to innovate it. The other thing I want to talk about when it comes to how to help you innovate some ideas, document your assumptions. So you can, whether it's a whiteboard or a sheet of paper, write down all your assumptions. These are the boundaries of why I can't do certain things. These are the boundaries that dictate. So maybe let's come up with an example. Let's talk about the podcast. We're talking about getting the podcast off the ground. My assumptions that I would jot down there were the podcast equipment's expensive.
Uh-huh.
It takes a certain level of expertise from a technical perspective that I don't have.
No one's going to want to listen to me.
No one's going to want to listen. So I would jot all these things down. Write those kinds of things down and then flip them. Flip them the other way. What if it's totally opposite of that? So, for example, I don't have enough resources. I need $100,000. What if you had none? What if you didn't need it at all? Then that will get you to start to think about possible solutions that go beyond those boundaries.
A little bit outside of the box.
And you're boxing yourself in
Exactly
reality.
right. Exactly
right?
right.
So try to figure, and now some of those boundaries are real.
Oh, yeah.
Like I don't have unlimited resources. Peace. That's valid. But why do you need that? What can you go do? You start to think of things in that way when you flip those assumptions the other way. So that's one thing that you'll hear people use quite a bit in terms of trying to come up with creative ideas. And then this is kind of a foreshadowing to the next phase we want to get into, but the other part in terms of how to help you be innovative in terms of your idea process, keep the circle of friends that you talk about these things with very close.
Yeah.
This is not something that you go broadcast to the world. And this is something that I've been bad about because I'm very transparent and I get passionate about an idea and I'll go share it with people. And here's what I find. Those people will destroy the idea. I'm talking about people that I know and love, that know and love me. They'll still destroy the idea, right? Why is that? Here's an important concept. This is not mine. I had the benefit to be able to reach out to a mentor of mine, Mr. Hubie Payne, and I pinged him about this because I learned the ideas of how to go incubate ideas from Hubie. And I pinged him and I said, hey, give me your thoughts on this. And I shared my thoughts, and he was like, yeah, this is really good. One of the things that he hit me with that I'm gonna drop his soundbite in here because it's so valuable and it's not mine, I can't take credit for it, which is don't underestimate the power of the status quo. Things that are the way they are will be defended whether they make sense or not. And even in your closest circle of friends that you think you can go share ideas with, they will still defend the status quo. So changing directions on things can be very difficult. So you want to be careful with what you share with those folks as you're developing ideas and as you're trying to kind of solidify something.
Right. And I mean, another part of this is you are a very cynical person. And I find that you surround yourself with other cynics.
Yeah.
So sometimes
they're called engineers.
So sometimes when you are trying to incubate your ideas and share it with your closest friends, their cynicism comes out. Mm-hmm. So how do you get around that? How do you get over that? Figure out whether what they're saying is actual or or is it just cynicism?
Yeah, and this is where I just don't share everything.
Yeah.
I'm very cautious with what pieces I share. If
Yeah.
I have an idea, I'll share maybe part, or I'll play dumb and ask questions. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that I do have a close circle network that I can be a little more open with.
Right.
And even when they shoot stuff down, I know they're still defending status quo. They don't even recognize they are.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop me from moving forward. I just use it to gather information. I'm not necessarily looking for their opinion. I'm looking for some factual information to see what's already being done in this space. Because if I'm talking about innovating, we're going to talk about creating the internet, and then I find out it's already been created, it'd be good to know that, right?
Right. So have you always been that way? Have you always been able to run with an idea if you believed that it was good? Or...
No. I'd say I would say I'm waiting on some knight in shining armor to come enable me.
Right.
I was waiting on, it was all my manager's responsibility. I'm waiting on somebody else. Now it's complete. I don't agree with that at all.
Where'd that come from?
You just get tired of waiting. And then, I think I was coached with some good mentors to say, why haven't you got this moving already?
Yeah.
And then when you're trying to defend why you haven't, you start to look back at your defense of why you weren't doing it, and you look at it differently. You go, you start thinking about your assumptions. Well, I assumed I couldn't do it. And then you realize, okay, there's nothing that was preventing me from taking some action.
Right. And it's super weird. I mean, I think I waited half my life. I was waiting for someone else to give me permission.
Yeah.
And it took me until, goodness, I was probably 40 before I decided that
I'm tired of waiting.
I'm going to have to give myself permission.
Yeah.
And if I fail, I fail, but I've
Absolutely.
got to go for it.
That's right. And so let's jump into the second idea. I think when I started making the transformation to where I could start to incubate ideas on my own is when I got this second part. Because I had plenty of things I thought were good ideas, right? But the part that really triggered for me was moving from think to know.
Okay.
How do you move from you think you have a good idea, but knowing you have a good idea? And what we're talking about is proof of concept. How can you go prove to yourself that this is a good idea? I've had tons of things I thought were good, but now I need to go get some data and prove it.
Okay.
How can I go find out? And there I would wait on somebody or think, and that's where I stopped. I'm not waiting on anybody. I'm going to go get this information myself.
Right.
I'm going to go show proof of concept to myself. That's when I think that's when it triggered for me, that I'm not waiting for someone and I can go prove it on my own.
Right.
Right. And so proof of concept is yours. And so why don't we do this? Well, you worry about what if I'm wrong? Hear another one. What if I'm right?
Yeah.
So that can be scary too.
Absolutely.
If I'm right in this proof of concept and I can go show this is a good idea, I'm telling you, overnight, I've had cases where, hey, you've been asked to hire 20 people. I don't know 20 people.
Right.
That's scary, right? So what if you're right and it turns out to be really great?
Right. I mean, you think about, discovering electricity and you're standing out there with that kite and there's a little bit of fear, right? The key on the kite, what if I'm right? What if I'm right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also I was listening to Dave Chappelle be interviewed by David Letterman. And this has been, towards the end of the year, into 2020, this has been kind of been rattling around in my brain. Maybe it was good to take a break. But Chappelle was asked by Letterman about a specific thing, and he had I won't get into the details, you can go watch it yourself, but he had this phrase that kind of stuck with me. And he talked about you have to leave room for redemption for people. Yeah. Right? In terms of why. And I think what he was talking about is why don't you dissociate with this entire group of people? And he says, because I value forgiveness for myself. I value redemption for myself because I've been wrong at times. And so I want to leave room for that too. What does that have to do with this? How many times do I think, well, I don't want to be wrong?
Yeah.
Right? And then I get super hung up on how something gets done rather than what problem needs to get solved and solving it. And engineers are real bad about this. We get really wrapped up around the how part. And then I go, I have to be right. I have to be right. And I think what I've learned is I don't care so much about that. I know this is a good idea because this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And there could be lots of different ways to go solve it. And I'm going to be flexible about those pieces. So as I do start to move from think to know, I know I'm going to be flexible in some of those areas. So when people come in, when I do start to share my idea with a small group of people,
right?
Incubation, right?
Right.
Not just, let's just crack the egg and see what happens. No, you got to get the heat and the humidity just right. You got to rotate the egg the right way. So you've got to take it slow. But as I do start to share the idea that I'm talking about, once I have proof of concept, once I do start to share that, I'm being I'm leaving room for my own redemption. I'm leaving space for, I know I'm right, this is a good idea, but the how part, I might need to have a little flexibility here and not be so entrenched in the how. Especially, and maybe that's just unique in the engineering world, but there's so many ways to solve problems. And if I'm talking to you and you're an influential person, and I'm saying, hey, I'd really like your buy-in to go help move this thing to the next phase, and you go, yeah, but you're doing this part all wrong. My initial reaction is, cool, let's do it your way too.
Right. Well, and I mean, I think back to the incubating of the eggs. And as I said, there's something called candling, where you can actually look inside that egg and you can see a little heart beating. And some of those happen quicker than others. And if you gave up on it too early and you threw the egg out, then that chicken would never be born. But if you just gave it a few more days, just a few more days, it could still develop.
Right. It's much like
but
much like cooking chicken, right? You don't want to eat it too soon. You'll get poisoned.
But of those 12 eggs, if you're doing 12 at a time, there's probably going to be one or two of them that don't make it.
Just like you can have a bunch of ideas that don't go anywhere.
But it didn't mean that the whole thing was a failure.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean I'm going to stop.
No.
Absolutely. So you want to keep some flexibility there. You want to give yourself some room to allow for how things happen. Because as you start to expand your circle and as you start to share your idea with folks, and again, I'm not talking about going public. You have to keep this real small. You have to keep your circle. The timing of who you share and when is super important.
Yeah.
I'd like to sit here and say, here's how. It's always this. It's not. That's not how this works.
Well, you never want to go too quickly and then realize there was a perspective you didn't see.
That's right. That's right. And you want to leave room for, and I think this is important, you want to leave space for allowing people to come in with their inputs and ideas and adjust how you're adjust the process that you're taking in terms of how you're solving it. Let them get their fingerprints on it. Right.
Right. And a lot of times people want it to be the Brent show. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a growth mindset. That's not a way to
You need to purge that from your mentality.
Yeah.
Right. You need to purge that from your mentality unless you want to go take this journey by yourself. Right. Because that's what's going to happen when you say it's only going to be my way. You can turn around and realize nobody's with you.
Right. Now how does this work like in the small business world? Like you have Brett Boyd that we visit with quarterly, right? And his idea was creating the garage door company that has got garage doors and gates and that kind of thing. How do you incubate that idea and get different perspectives and everything? Because that does kind of have to be the Brett show.
It comes down to what actions can you go take next.
Yeah.
You can't think about the big thing that you're trying to solve. That's not how it works. You break it down in what is the small step that you can take next. Let's talk about the podcast as the example. When we started talking about this in maybe third quarter of 2019,
right?
And I had a good friend pushing me that you should go do this. And I said, and so the first step to me, once I decided in my brain, okay, this is something that I think I'm supposed to do. Once I got to that point, the first step to me was committing to that person that I'm going to do this.
Right.
So I verbally or in writing, via text message said, I'm going to do this. I'm committed to do it. Now I'm verbally committed. Now I look like an idiot to take it back and say I was just kidding. So that was step one for me. But that's not going to get it done. The next step, which was I think maybe more important, which was I bought a digital recorder that you're listening to that enabled what you're listening to right now. And
right.
It wasn't incredibly expensive. I didn't spend 9 months doing research like I could have. I looked and said, this is good enough to get us off the ground. It doesn't have to be the fanciest setup in the world. And I bought some microphones and some basic stuff. And there was no analysis paralysis. I got close enough and I just pulled the trigger on it. Now I've invested a little bit of funds in this and I'm even more committed.
Right.
So it was about what are the next steps that you can take. Then the next step I took was I sat down with my son and we just recorded and goofed around and recorded for a bit. And then you and I sat down and recorded for a bit. And then I actually recorded an interview with somebody. The first interview I recorded, I've never published.
Right.
I may one day, but it's never been published. You have to break it into what the next step you can take is. What's the action you can take will move you down the field a little bit and keep things moving.
Right. And a lot of times it is that you need the commitment. You need a commitment somewhere to someone that I am doing this.
Yes. And take some action.
Yep.
It can't just be words. What can you do to actually take some action? And a lot of people, I think, taking action is, well, I'm going to go tell a bunch of people. No, nope. That's going to get you shot down. Like, how can you move to, I think this is a good idea, to knowing this is a good idea? What would it take to get you to where you know? Another good example on the small business space, I was talking with a good friend of mine, Dave Borski. We were discussing this. I think it was either, I don't know if it was in the interview when I interviewed him last year or separately, where he was talking about having some really good ideas and then trying to figure out how to get them moving. And a lot of times we'll think about, well, I need to build this big grand thing. He's like, no, let's just do this small thing on the side.
Right.
What's the small thing I can go do on the side that will allow me just to go learn?
Right.
What's a minimal investment, whether it's time or resources, I can go do to see if this even matters? Will customers care about this, right? Rather than going and building some giant grand thing and hoping that they come. It doesn't have to be like that. Start small. Okay, so that's moving from think to know. The next thing that we want to talk about is moving from knowing to showing, right? And this is where you do start to go to market a little bit. But this is something that I'll lean back into to Hubie's point earlier. Never underestimate the power of status quo.
Yeah.
People won't like change, and they just straight won't like you. I've experienced both. I've had great ideas that people were very negative about, and like early in my career before I learned this stuff, and I'm scratching my head like, why are you against this? They weren't against it. They were against my organization.
Yeah.
They didn't like my organization having good ideas. Holy cow. Why is that? That shouldn't be that way.
The power of politics.
This is politics.
Yeah.
This is how this is. You have to be careful about who you're sharing what with. I also got burned by having a great idea and not taking it up my chain of command. I had great ideas I talked with people about outside of my organization, only to have my organization leader come and grab me and say, what are you doing? That's a great idea. Why you don't think to come bring that to me? You think I could help you with that? And then I go, yeah, that's a valid point. Who I'm sharing my ideas with. And then you start to realize, whoa, I have good ideas. Then you go, I better get good at protecting my ideas and getting them so they don't get shot down.
Right. But how do you protect your ideas so that when you're moving it up the chain or if you're sharing it with someone, they don't claim it as their own and run with it?
Well, it's the same thing we just talked about. You're very careful about who you share it with.
Yeah.
Right. You have to watch that circle closely. The other thing that you can be careful about is if you do, sometimes I do need to go share a little bit of information with people. Otherwise I can't learn. Maybe I need input or feedback from them because they have certain expertise. What I'm not going to do is share everything with them. I might share a little bit. And this is this may sound manipulative, right? And maybe perhaps it is a touch, but I'm not only just protecting my intellectual property, my idea, because I have had plenty of cases where I have an idea, take it to somebody, and then they go to market with it, right? And then they go, so you want to be careful there. So I don't want to share everything with them. So I'll just share the pieces that I think are necessary for them to be able to address and answer the question. I think that's important. I think and this is something that I'm not the best at, but I've gotten better at it. I've gotten better at being, and the way I've gotten better at it is I feel, at first I struggled with it because I felt like I was being dishonest by not being fully transparent. When in the reality is, there's a lot. I just have to accept the fact that there's a bunch of things there that are still in the think bucket and I don't know yet. So I don't talk about things that I don't know.
Have you ever moved something from the think to the know and then back to the think?
Yeah, that's called overconfidence. That's called being very cocky, thinking you have all the answers only to find out that you're very wrong.
How do you move things from know to show back to know?
Well, I think be flexible and listen to feedback. I think when you get to that spot where you're leaving room for your own redemption, that's where that Dave Chappelle thing really. And he wasn't talking about corporate stuff. He was talking about race. But in my case, I latched onto it as, man, it's no different in the corporate world, no different in the small business world. You have to leave some room. I could be wrong here. And when you come with that humble approach, it allows you to really get better because now you're seeking to get better. And it's like I remember hearing someone say years ago, and I've used this before, and I would tell my teams, I don't know how we're going to win. I just know we're going to win.
Right.
Like I want to be flexible in the house space. So if I'm in the middle of a meeting and I think this is a really great idea and I'm pitching it and they're like, I don't like that. What if you did it this way? I've experienced that, and I go, that is a great idea that we had not considered. Because as you continue to expand, you're going to get feedback, and if you can't adapt and adjust as you go, it's going to die.
Well, and I think that this year specifically is going to be a very powerful year, and it is going to separate people, because you're going to have some people who have sat for the last year and done nothing and have just moaned and groaned and complained and felt like the world was moving around them and they weren't actually doing anything.
Yeah.
And then you have some people that are going to start going back to the offices with tons of ideas.
Sure.
And they are going to be ready to go and conquer the world.
Yeah.
And if we can make space to be one of those people right now, if we can start that incubation process right now, then you are just catapulted to the top.
Well, I see so many people who have I hear from so many people who have good ideas, and they struggle to get them moving.
Oh, yeah.
And the most common reason is the two things that we've covered already. The first is they're waiting on somebody to come save them. They're waiting on somebody to come magically take their idea. It's a management problem. No, you need to move that. Like, your management's not going to invest in things. Keep in mind, the power of the status quo is powerful. Change is difficult, right? So they're waiting for you to show the proof of concept of something. And I've seen it firsthand. When I come with proof of concept, I have had a senior leader stand up and come give me a hug. They were like, finally, this is what I've been waiting for. So you've got to think of it that way, that you have to go move it to a no category before you start marketing there. You don't wait for somebody. And then the other thing that I would say with regard to the reason people struggle with it, not knowing how to go scale it. They either try to scale too fast and they start marketing too quickly.
Right.
And the status quo eats them alive.
Well, and once you've been shut down once or twice, you have a tendency to not try again.
Oh yeah, for sure. Or they're looking for perfection. I'm just waiting on it to be perfect.
Right.
Once there's another line you get to know, and you go, okay, now I know. Well, do I though? Maybe I need to do this, and these 5 hoops. Whoa, easy. I think you need to come to a realization that if you'll leave room for your own redemption, if you'll leave room for this thing to be flexible and adjust as you go, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get to where you go, I know this is impactful. Now I can start to think about, how do I slowly expand my circle? Let's talk a little bit about that. I think this is important. Because I'm talking about it generically, but I'm not giving any kind of tactical feedback on how to go do this. And I hate self-help stuff that does that takes that approach. I want to be different there. How can you go start to grow that circle? Okay, this is I think important. Who influences? We're talking about changing status quo. Okay, who influences change in those areas? You need to think through that. We're talking about the politics of change now, right? Who influences change in those spaces? Whatever your idea is, when you have to think about this. Heck, you could write notes down and say, okay, the status quo is X. If I wanted to change that, who influences that change? More than likely, there's a director or a VP or someone up the chain of command in a corporate structure that is going to be the ultimate person you're going to have to gain alignment. Now, you don't go there straight. You need to devise a plan for yourself about, how can I work my way to that point?
And it's not always the person you think it's going to be. Sometimes it's that person's administrator or friend or colleague.
Because that person's influenced by someone.
That's right.
So you have to figure out who they're influenced by.
That's exactly right.
Now, don't do this on your own. If you're talking about going up the chain of command in another organization, work it up your chain of command. Your chain of command is paid to know how to influence those things. So it should be worked up your chain and then across if you're talking about something that does branch out into another organization, right? Now, what about for small business cases? If you're talking about change, I think that's harder, because now you're talking about changing consumer market thought process, branding, things like that. How do you change that? How do you say, well, I need to go change how people are doing gate installation for, in Brett's case, right? That's a much more challenging thing, because it's not as easy a path from a political perspective to go control things.
Right. And I mean, when we first started talking about the incubation episode, I immediately thought of banking apps. And who was the genius who decided we no longer need to go to a bank to deposit a check?
Right.
Somebody made that decision.
Right.
And then they did the research on it to know, you know what? I'm not the only one that doesn't want to go to a bank to deposit a check.
Right.
We can take a picture.
Yeah.
Right.
And, that's a great example. If you're a small business owner and you're going, it would be great if I could just change this area. I don't like the financial side. Maybe I don't know why we couldn't do it this way. What's preventing you from just doing it? I'm not talking about advertising it and letting everybody
Right.
know, hey, everybody, I do my finances different than everybody else. That might make people a little anxious.
But if you can tell your audience that I have something you need that you don't even know you need. We didn't know that we needed Alexa 3 years ago.
Sure.
We didn't know.
Right.
Now we couldn't live without it.
Yeah, and I guarantee you, if Bezos had to ask everybody, hey, is this something you'd value? People would be like, oh, what the first time I had somebody give me that thing, I thought, what a pile of trash this is. I don't want this thing listening to me.
Yeah.
Now I find myself at somebody else's house and I'm watching something or listening to something. Hey, whose thing's this? And I'm looking for the Echo for it to tell me, or for the Google thing to tell me, and it's not there. And I'm like, I've gotten addicted to this thing.
Dude, we were in the middle of that toilet paper crisis, right? And I had told Alexa, tell me when this comes back in stock. And she did. She said, it's back in stock right now. Would you like to order now? Yes, order now. It came to my door. It was amazing.
And you don't think the Russians are listening to you? All right, separate. So, no black helicopters in the first episode of the season. All right, we'll leave that one alone. So figure out who influences change in the area, right? Will they be open to the idea if you present them a clear winning strategy? If you say, okay, this person is the key to institutionalizing change in the area, trying to change the status quo. If you bring them that idea, will they just shoot it down? If it's yes, move forward and review it with them, up through your chain of command. If no, then you're going to need to more slowly incubate and understand what motivates them.
Right.
So I hope this helps. These are some ideas, moving from think to know, to show, to be able to illustrate, to get things off the ground. What it really comes down to is you choose your path. You're not waiting for a savior. What actions can you go take? You got to choose. Are you going to whine about the problems around the water cooler? Are you going to actually take? That's fine. I do that too. I'll sit and commiserate with people around the water cooler. Oh, it's all virtual now. But if I'm really passionate about something needs to get done, I have to find a way. What action can I go take? I have a really, really great idea that I'm working on right now that I will not share with anyone. I think maybe 4 people have heard it. And I shared it with one person, and they kind of gave me a questionable look. And then I realized it's not ready. I'm not sharing this anymore. In fact, I had to take it off all slides. I don't want it anywhere for anybody to see until I can move it to no. Like, I know it's a good idea, but I got to prove it. I got to go show proof of concept. And that's one of the things I'll be spending a big part of my extra time on this year. It's not my day job, but with some of my side time, I'm going to be working on trying to prove that there is a particular thing I think will be very impactful to my company.
Right. And you also have to keep in mind that you don't have to know what the final destination is. You just know that there is a problem, and then you figure out what your next step is.
And halfway there, I might realize, well, that was a bad idea. But along the way, I found these other 4 things that are really cool too, right? So it's part of the journey that I'm going to take. And I don't learn anything if I sit there wishing.
Right.
I have to start moving and taking some action towards the end goal to try to solve the problem I'm trying to solve. So, guys, use this to get your ideas off the ground. What action can you take? Okay, if you made this big resolution, okay, maybe you're like me and you're not a resolution person, but I don't like to say, all right, this is the thing in 2021 I'm going to go do. It's more to me, I know this is an area I need to go impact. Whether it happens in 21 or 22, I don't know.
Right.
But I need, what's the next step I can go take to get this off the ground so I stop dreaming and wishing and whining about things and start to show impact.
Start working
That's going to
towards
make a big difference for you in your career. So you're not the person that's a victim, but you're driving change. Beautiful.
Love it.
Welcome back to 2021. It's a new year, new stuff. Folks, go attack the world and get your ideas off the ground, and we'll see you next week.